Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Nate Weisenberg. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. I'm a senior program associate with the Center for Scientific Responsibility and Justice at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. Our center serves as the secretariat for the Science and Human Rights Coalition, which is a network of scientific and engineering membership organizations that recognize a role for scientists and engineers in human rights, and also the responsibilities of scientists and engineers towards human rights. Today's session is the first of this year's Science, Technology, and Human Rights Conference, an annual coalition event that brings together scientists, human rights practitioners, and many others to work together toward mutual goals and share knowledge, methods, and expertise. And the theme of this year's event is the Human Right to Science Pathways for Action. We hope you'll join us online throughout this week and in person, if you're able, next Monday and Tuesday in Washington, D.C., as we highlight this crucial but often overlooked human right, why the right to science matters, and identify the actions we can take together so everyone can truly enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications. So in a moment, our team is going to put a poll that we'd love for you to respond to. It's about your level of familiarity with the right to science. And this will be a great help, not only for our conversations today, but going forward. And so without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. Their full bios are available on the conference website, so I'll just do the very basics right now, and they're welcome to expand on them as they start their presentations. Dr. Janvier Gassana will be presenting first. He's a professor of environmental and occupational health at Kuwait University, and he'll be discussing the right to science and the global South. He'll be followed by Dr. Helle Porsdam, professor of history and cultural rights and UNESCO chair in cultural rights at the University of Copenhagen, and her presentation will focus on scientific freedom. And last but not least, we're honored to be joined by the United Nations Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, Dr. Alexandra Santaki. She will share some general comments and then pose some questions to our audience, which you'll be able to respond to using the Zoom chat feature. Those were sent a few days ago to all registrants, and when she starts her presentation, we'll put them in the chat again. After the presentations, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And then after the session concludes, we hope you'll join us for some social time and networking with fellow conference attendees. That will be a separate Zoom meeting, so we'll put the link for that in the chat at the end of this session. Thank you again for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Gassana for his presentation. Welcome, everyone.
All right, so I'm trying, as Nat said, when he is introducing me, I am a professor at Kuwait University. I was born in Global South. I was born in Rwanda, and then I moved to US and more than 30 years ago. And then I went to school at University of Illinois, Chicago, and I went down to, to Florida International University, where I had an opportunity to help establish a school of public health. And I came here in Kuwait to just basically do the same thing. So let me show you what I really intend to do. We know the right sciences include both the right to participate in science, and then a number of people in the community are part of this exercise we, as academicians, really get involved in, and right to access the value of knowledge, our benefits and progress and advances that are a result of science. But there is a catch, because most of the members of the community are not really, they don't have the health literacy. It's something I come back on when I'll be talking about the community health workers. There's always a joke. I started my work in the community with community health workers, and then I end up with occupational and environmental specialists in the field, and in the area of occupational health and environmental health. So basically, when we apply this to public health, there are two views. The prevailing system of drug development and health services provision that's being actually talked about in terms of global health is not really oriented toward the universal public access, the issue of copyrights, and even when the funding support the underlying research. So those primary of the national focus, they see these, the strategic values and existence of the right to science as a framework for recommending policy and programmatic reforms. However, those in the Global South, they have another perspective. They're really very skeptical about the potential of the right to science and to advance public health and access to medicine, because we have a number of cases, a number of issues of what they call neglected diseases, simply because these people have many challenges and they don't seem really to benefit from their science. So that's why they're very skeptical. And in fact, even during COVID-19, we have a number of examples of how they had a hard time really to even have access to vaccines. And so the human rights-based approach really tells us, in fact, we should include the benefit of scientific advancement and foster the place of women in science, which is really a big issue in the global South. We pretty much have very few women in science, and this will guide establishment of sound policy and ethical issues in science, innovation, and technology. So UNESCO promotes the right to share, in scientific advancement by enabling those in marginalized communities to contribute and benefit from scientific progress. The problem is the times they contribute, they don't really benefit fully from the scientific progress. So the organization also takes action to preserve the diversity of knowledge system and sustainable use of natural resources in connection with rights of indigenous people. I did some work in Congo, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a neighboring country to where I'm from. I'm from Rwanda, and Congo is really next to Rwanda. And I saw what the mining companies are doing to the indigenous people. Simply when they find out, they have cobalt, gold, diamond, where they're trying to exploit, they have basically they pretty much they displace them, and creates a really tremendous issues and within indigenous population. So the right of science can support one of the SDG, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, the first one being poverty reduction. In fact, I will explain later when I get to the community of health workers. They can be used in science, technology, and innovation, and that can really help Africa to move forward as an example. But the same thing will apply to South America or even Asia, where I am now. So, the building up and invigorating African scientific system can be very, very important to the growth of Africa. And a lessons from the program called the WASH, which is the Water and Sanitation and Hygiene. This was really heavily promoted by USAID. I know this because when I was a kid, I remember benefiting from it, because the goal was just making sure that everybody have really the right to water and sanitation. That program had a tremendous achievement in the area of improving sanitation and hygiene practices among the local population. However, what they had to use, because most of the people in the community don't have the health literacy needed to be able to understand the extent of the benefit of science. They use community health workers. This is an old idea. It was promoted by the 1978 World Health Organization of Primary Health Care in Almaty. Today is Kazakhstan. It used to be part of the Soviet Union. And they played a big role actually in WASH implementation in the Global South. And I think if you can use this, because when properly trained and supported, they provide effective services and outside the healthcare facilities. I mean, they help nurses, doctors, and other health professionals because they are cultural competent. They really can talk their own people. Really, because their job includes outreach, community education, informal counseling, social support, and advocacy. So the scientific community and the public have been increasingly aware of and concerned about the presence of exogenous factor in working in a living environment, about the health impact of substance in the global South. So everybody's working up this, but the community health workers are the ones really in between who are trying to help them. So that's why I feel the right to science comes as a tool that can bridge research gap regarding interface of environmental occupational health. And actually, when we get to this, there is a milestone in Kenya. This is the William Ruto who basically decided basically his government to make sure that community health workers get paid as doctors and nurses get paid, because they have been really a big impediment to the implementation of community health workers idea in many countries, including the US. You know, when I was in Miami, I have community workers who were working with me, but it was really the pay was dependent on the grant I had. And once the grant runs out, they don't have any income as such. However, you know, this is the news we have from you know, that's about Kenya, just made it professional basically. Now community workers will be paid as a nurse or as a doctor, and then there is another president of basically Kenyan descent. This is Obama. So you remember what you call Obamacare, ACA, which Affordable Care Act. In 2014, when he really came out, was able to get the ACA up and running, that was the first time he was really, the community health workers in the US started to be being paid. Before it was not possible. So this was in 2014, and at the time I was actually leaving, I really didn't have any grant. And in 2016, now when I left the US, and I was talking one of the community workers I used to work with, and he said, "Oh, I just retired. So I'm coming back, and in January we really would like to really get back on the community workers." And she gave me all this news about now that Massachusetts, California is really moving forward with this. You know, basically, you know, medical centers and, you know, clinics and hospitals are really using this now because they're being paid now through ACA. So, you know, that's really my thoughts. And I think this is something we really look forward when I get back to Miami. But we really intend to really make this global. The focus will be Africa, the Caribbean, South America. And in the Middle East where I am, but most of the work will be done, training will be done online. And that's all I really had to tell you about this, you know, the right to science and Global South. And thank you for your attention.
Apologies, I was muted. Thank you so much, Dr. Kazana. We're going to now transition to Dr. Porsdam for her presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting me to this. I've been much looking forward to this. In 2021, I edited this book together with my son. It's called The Right to Science, Then and Now. And in the foreword to that book, Leah Bishop, who's one of the first scholars to really write about cultural rights and the right to science in particular, put it very nicely. She wrote that the right to science is a philosophical ideal, a legal promise, a political discourse, and perhaps a social movement. Next slide, please. In her foreword, Bishop also very helpfully introduces what for her are the central themes of the right to science. And that's why I wanted to start with her here today. You can see some of them here. And we go from, these are very wide ranging, and you can see from freedom of scientific inquiry, integrity of research, to free and informed participation in experiments and new technologies. So what is the right to science? Well, it's been there all along. It was outlined in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration from 1948. And Article 27 says that, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits," unquote. And this was then repeated in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which has 4 parts. The first part of that article outlines the right to science, and then the other 3 parts outline the obligations that states parties have with regard to this right. And these obligations are ensuring that science and culture are conserved, developed, and diffused. This is mentioned in the second part of Article 15. Then the third part concerns respecting scientific and artistic freedom. This is an obligation that states have according to Article 15, the third part. And finally, the fourth part concerns recognizing the importance of international contacts and cooperation in the scientific and cultural fields. Next slide, please. In a couple of months, Rowman and Littlefield are gonna publish a book on scientific freedom that I've co-written together with 3 others. And in the book, we take as our point of departure Article 15.3, the one that concerns scientific freedom. And the wording is this, that the states parties to the present covenant undertake to respect the freedom indispensable for scientific research and creative activity. So scientific freedom isn't just a human right in itself, as you see it outlined here in Article 15.3. It's also, we argue, a necessary instrument to fulfill the right to science in general. It is a constitutive element. It's a necessary part of the right to science as a whole. And for reasons that have to do with the history, the object, and the purpose, and also the current understanding of the right to science, and we go into detail with this in our book. For all these reasons, we define scientific freedom as consisting of at least 3 elements. The first one is freedom from interference in science. The second one is freedom to participate in science, and we already heard about that from the previous speaker. And finally, there's freedom to access science. Next slide, please. For the purpose of our book, we define scientific freedom in the way that you see here, that it is the right to pursue scientific research without undue external influence, to participate in scientific activities, and to access scientific knowledge and resources. This includes freedom from interference, that's negative freedom, and the availability of resources and support, which would be positive freedom, and extends to all branches of learning, not just the natural or social sciences, provided that a sincere bona fide attempt is made at advancing knowledge, rather than merely promoting a particular opinion. Now working on this, I've come to believe that scientific freedom is really, really important. It's necessary for scientific progress and therefore has important implications for the continued advance of human well-being, human knowledge. But conversely also, to the extent that scientific freedom can lead to dangerous applications, to mistakes, and here I'm referring to dual-use science and technology, there are really few areas of policy that can be more important for protecting the existing health and well-being of all of us. But there are, at present, significant challenges or threats to scientific freedom. One of these is intellectual property and paywalls. Scientific information, data, hypotheses are often stored behind paywalls, and they require paid either individual or institutional subscriptions. And if information cannot be accessed, then it cannot be used to drive scientific progress. A second threat to openness in science and global scientific cooperation are trade and other wars. And here you can think about the present trade war between the US and China, and also of the recent invasion of Russia into Ukraine. But the one that I want to focus on here is science skepticism, or what some have called science-related populism. It's a variant of populism, but it doesn't so much target political elites, but instead academic elites. As anti-science populists see it, academics that are involved in the production of knowledge and truth don't acknowledge the kind of information that, quote unquote, ordinary people gather in their lives and that they experience to be true. And you can easily think of examples here. Conspiracist online users promoting counter knowledge over establishment knowledge, reluctance to receive COVID-19 vaccines and to acknowledge in general public health regulations, fake news, disinformation, and so on. Next slide, please. As this cartoon, and some of you may know it, it's from 2017 by Piraro. As it shows, I think very nicely, there are brute facts out there. And sometimes having trusted access to those facts can really make all the difference between life and death. In a less dramatic fashion, perhaps, the cartoon also suggests that citizens generally need facts. They need accurate knowledge to make practical judgments and to go about their everyday lives. And finally, the cartoon also illustrates that citizens' access to facts is often highly mediated. The structural features that have facilitated the rise of fake news is the growing reliance on social media for news and information. Next slide, please. For scholars whose research challenges established ways of thinking, dissemination of their research on social media can be met with unsubstantiated emotional claims, even verbal attacks. And I think you've probably experienced this too. But we all know that dialogue with the public is really, really important, because the public cannot exercise their right to science unless scientific knowledge is disseminated, is diffused in such a way that they understand it. But then who should do this dissemination? We know from many surveys that most scientists consider responding to journalists to be a professional duty, a part of the job. But to engage directly with the public, that's a different issue. That's a challenge. So some seek the help of professional science journalists. And that's an obvious solution, of course. But we shouldn't forget that as science journalists attempt to avoid jargon use and to increase straightforwardness in science communication, to translate it so that the public understand, then sometimes accuracy and important details can get lost in the process. And inaccurate arguments cannot be countered directly and on the spot. And perhaps most importantly, science journalists may not always or necessarily prioritize or get across to the public the kind of excitement that's entailed in the creation and the provision of knowledge. And this is crucial, this excitement, I think, for at least two reasons. The first one is to avoid talking down to people. There's nothing quite like genuine, catchy excitement that can help scientists address the public and, of course, their political representatives as fellow citizens and fellow stakeholders in modern democracies. We're in this mess together. The second reason has to do with the chance that engaging with the public gives scientists to create support for their research. Because since access to and participation in science and in science policymaking is a vital part of the right to science in a democratic society, it's really important for scientists to be able to show the public why their particular line of research deserves to be funded and is important. Becoming more visible, being able to grasp the attention of the public, the wider public, and their political representatives is something that can really make all the difference to the individual scholar and their professional career prospects. And here again, enthusiasm, the ability to show and tell, will play a very important role. So I'd argue that scientists need to be actively involved themselves in communicating to the public what their science is about, what its potential is, and why it is that science in general is important as a public good. So for the sake of the general public, but also for our own sake, we in the academic and scientific world, we need to prioritize this more than we currently do, I think. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Porsdam. And now we'll turn it over to Dr. Sonntaki for her presentation.
Hello, and thank you very much for organizing this. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk to all of you. And it is especially a pleasure because my forthcoming report to the Human Rights Council, the United Nations Human Rights Council, the main body responsible for human rights, is going to be on this right, on the right to science. The reason I chose this topic is exactly as the previous speaker said, it is an unexplored topic. So although it is human rights that is included in a legally binding instrument, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that has been signed and ratified by most states, more than 180 states, yet it has not been the focus of attention so far in the international in the international arena. And this changed recently, especially with the COVID crisis. We started asking more and more questions about, who gives us the information, who has the right to take part in the decision making, who has the right to take part in the decision making of political decisions, but also on the individual's conduct vis-a-vis the COVID. And this also coincided with the emergence of the discussion on AI and what this means for human rights, but also for very recently, currently, what's going on in Israel and Gaza about information and misinformation, disinformation when it comes to social media and science. So for this reason, this is becoming a very hot topic that I believe it is very important to explore. I don't have all the answers, and I rely very much to you to help me posing the finding the answers, but also sometimes just posing the right questions. And that's why I have asked for you to reflect on 4 questions that I have. First of all, just a couple of things about me, about my mandate. As probably you know, United Nations Special Rapporteurs are independent experts that are appointed by the Human Rights Council for 3 + 3 years in order to explore, in order to help the implementation of the rights that are relating to their mandate and to monitor their implementation. So in my case, it's cultural rights. And cultural rights, as Helle very accurately said, include the right to science in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, but among other sources, the right to science is seen as part of the wider spectrum of cultural rights. So I do this by thematic reports, but also by official visits and also by communication. So allegations that are sent to me by email, and then I look into them and I get into the confidential discussion with the state. And then if the state does not give us the right answers or full answers, or we believe that we have to do with a violation of cultural rights, then we go public. And so it is very important to know this, because so far I don't believe that we have a lot of communications regarding violations of the right to science. And I think that this does not really correspond to the reality, which is violations of the right to science in a lot of places and around the world, as our first speaker said and showed us. So in discussing the report that we were going to make, we thought that I thought that the right to access is a very important right, but I wonder whether, to some respect, it cannot really be separated from the right to participation to science. And I also wonder whether this is a right that really needs political will, the right to access, whereas maybe the right to participation in science has not been explored very much. And I think that states are still, states and individuals are still confused about what is the extent of the right to participation when it comes to science, and what are the limits? And I think that this is a very topical issue. So the questions that I have for you is, first of all, discussing the channels that go from the state and the decision making to the scientists. Like Hella said, scientists also have, a lot of responsibilities as well. So, I wanted to know what kind of science policy interface platforms. So, what kind of channels connect science with policy making, and at the national level, but also at the international level, so that all political decisions that that have to do with science are informed and discussed previously by the experts, by scientists. And what are the challenges and the elements necessary in order for these channels to work well? So we have a lot of people, like the previous speaker said, a lot of people that are very suspicious of the political decisions, and some people will say rightly so. And some people would say no. So for this reason, I think it's important to know what is this the channels that link political decisions with the scientific community. The second issue is the second question is very much relating to what I was saying to you earlier, this discussion about, who takes the decisions and who is entitled to take the decisions. So, the right of every person to take part in scientific progress and in decisions concerning its direction. What are the discussions in your environment, in your country, and what is the situation? So, these came up again, for example, in the recent crisis with COVID, that, do the experts say one thing, but as individuals, do we have the right to have an opinion? And do we have a right to have an opinion to what the state is going to do? So, if the overwhelming majority of for example, referendums, what do you think about referenda when it comes to really scientific matters? Do they work, and should we have referenda when it comes to, I don't know, vaccines or AI, etc.? And also, assuming, for example, that I don't want to follow I disagree with what the experts say, do I have should I have input in the decision making of the state? So if there's a lot of talk at the moment in human rights about and rightly so, about the right participation in decision making in all aspects of the public life. How does this right translate when it comes to the right to science? The third question is relating, but different to that, to the previous one. So, ordinary people doing science, so what we call citizen science, is it considered important in your country or in your discipline? And how is it understood, and what measures have they been put in place to support it? And we had the first speaker did talk about indigenous science, for example, and I'm very interested in this issue, and in my report I will talk a little bit about that. But it's going to be interesting to see whether there are foundations by the state that actually support these citizen science. And also, if we see the indigenous sciences as something sui generis, as some people see general indigenous rights, or we also have citizen science when it comes to minorities, when it comes to other communities that have scientific interests beyond experts, and what we will call experts anyway. And finally, in general, how scientific freedom is respected, protected, and promoted in your country. I think that this is the basis, I guess, that of the report, what kind of protection there is. And also, what are the limitations of this protection? So we hear very often that limitations of the right to science have to do with public health. have to do with the rights of others. They have to do with, other public order, etc., public safety, national security, very much so. So I think that it is very important to see what are these limitations and to which extent are these limitations interpreted in the right way, which is restrictively, so as to allow the right to science to flourish, and to which extent these limitations are used as pretexts, first of all, for the state to enforce their own understanding of science, and secondly, to use science to manipulate and to use it as a propaganda mechanism rather than, as an inclusive concept that promotes the well-being of individuals and communities. And finally, in this respect, I'm also quite interested, and I will talk a little bit in the report about the responsibility of scientists. So do scientists have responsibility that relate to human rights? In the human rights language, we talk a lot about the responsibilities of states, the human rights responsibilities of states, but what about of scientists? Do they have responsibilities that relate to human rights? And who sets these responsibilities, and by which what language is used? Is the human rights language the language used, or another, ethics, etc., used? So I think that these are interesting topics that I am trying to figure out as well. And sometimes, as I said, the questions do not lead to very black and white answers, but hopefully this is going to be a starting point together with all of you who have been working on these issues for a long time, to help us understand more and convey more to states and the international community about the need to monitor and implement an inclusive right to science. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so I would like to invite Dr. Quezana and Porsdam to also turn your video back on, and we can move into a questions and answers portion of our conversation. Thank you all so much. This has been a really rich conversation so far, and I want to encourage participants to think about the questions that the Special Rapporteur just posed, and feel free to write your comments in the chat in responses to those. And I will also leave an email address if you want some more time to digest and would like to send us thoughts by email. Feel free to send it to that's the mailbox for our center, and we can make sure that those questions are and comments are passed on. So feel free, if you need some more time to think about or write a longer response, and setting us in the right forum for that, that's totally fine. This can be an ongoing conversation, not just limited to this hour. I see there's one question in the Q&A box, and feel free if you have other questions to post those there. I do want to start with a question for the panel related to scientific responsibility, and Dr. Zanfaki, you just talked about this, so you don't necessarily need to elaborate more, but I welcome Drs. Porsdam and Quezana in particular, if you have any thoughts on scientists' individual responsibilities, and then Dr. Zanfaki, feel free to jump in with more. But that's something we're really concerned about at AAAS. We always talk about scientific freedom and scientific responsibility as being two sides of the same coin. And I'm curious, Dr. Porsdam and Dr. Quezana, what your perspectives are on scientists' responsibilities and what more needs to be done to make them more widely known, both among the scientific community and more broadly.
If I may, in the field of public health, we have quite a number of challenges, and yes, we do research, and we reload our graphs, and however, what we do, we pretty much we have this ivory tower mentality, where we stay in our offices. And I remember I used to do work in the community, in downtown Miami, and that's why one study that I conducted in Miami was lead poisoning among children, which actually I'm replicating here in Kuwait. And people are wondering how I do this in community. These were my colleagues, They never really, stood in the community to really deal with issues of public health. And I remember when we were establishing the school, we invited the president and CEO of Association of Schools of Public Health, and I said, I mean, Science of Public Health was created to help people who were really in need, people who were poor, who didn't have really sanitation, hygiene practices. But now today, it's pretty much benefiting the way off. And I said, do you think for the last 100 years we made the progress? He said, no. And they said, what are you doing now? So now every school of public health is required to have a department of public practice. So people can go in community instead of just collecting data and then do the analysis. And we love, what Martin Luther King used to call paralysis of analysis. So we keep analyzing things, but we don't get to apply. And that's really why I'm passionate about applying the research findings in community, because that's why we do science, to make a progress. I don't know what Dr. Porsdam hears about this, but I think that's, at least in public health, that's the problem we have.
Yes, I agree. Well, I think absolutely that responsibility is the flip side of freedom, and I think that statement that the AAAS made in Science, was it 2017, has been correctly and widely used in the Right to Science community ever since, because it's correct that that's the way it is. I think there's a big, because science and technology take up such an enormous role in our lives, there's a fear among the public of dual use. And it's important for the way in which the public may trust scientists and the academic community that we communicate. Again, this is one of the reasons why I'm interested in Article 15.2, which is about the importance of communicating. And I really think that in parts of the legal community, there is a lot of research going on anticipation, on what's called the precautionary principle. Can we somehow anticipate what may develop into dual use science and technology? And the wider the role of science, the more important that aspect comes. And we really have to take that fear seriously. I think that the public, that all of us have, what are these scientists going to do to us next? What can happen here? So, and in terms of there are codes of ethics within the scientific community. And it's a good question. Can we do more with those? Can an organization such as yours help set agendas for those kinds of codes of ethics, for example? So it's a moral imperative for a scientist, is that responsibility, especially from a human rights perspective, I think.
And actually, that's a very good point, Dr. Porsdam, because you see, nurses, doctors, pharmacists have a code of ethics, but in the public health, yes, there were attempts, but we don't have really published and known to the public how we behave when we're dealing with the public health, And that's really something really, and I think the AAAS can do really a good job in promoting this, Because I think every profession should have some code of ethics. If you remember the Tuskegee, whatever, syphilis experiment in the US, and the way I was introduced to it, it's when Bill Clinton nominated Dr. Foster, who was a Black, was really part of the experiment, to his own people, If he had I mean, I remember at the time they went on to bash him. He didn't become the Surgeon General because of what he did. He knew what he was doing was wrong. But yeah, that's there's a lack of ethical codes. Like nurses, doctors do have, and I think that's an important subject. So. Yeah.
So, Dr. Samtaki.
At the same time, I think it is, and although I do believe that there should be codes of conduct everywhere, and I do believe that scientists have responsibilities, at the same time, sometimes you see that the state is pushing away their own responsibility by putting it on the scientists. So it is a way of deflecting from their own responsibilities by kind of pushing it on the scientists. And I think that this is something that, we have seen recently, oh, it's not us, this is not a political decision. This is what, the scientists said, and whatever the scientists said suddenly, becomes, the Bible, the holy the holy book, and we accept on that without any responsibility of the state. So I think it is very important for us to see that there are multiple layers in the responsibility, in the human rights responsibilities that we have to push for. May I also, if I may, if we have finished with this issue, I really kind of like the comment, all the comments, but also the comment by Bevin Waden, and I'm really sorry if I don't say these correctly. And I think that their comment really points towards the discrimination on the basis of status, and I think that this is when it comes to the outcomes of science and who has access and participation in to the products of science. And I think that what Bevin was saying is that I guess there are all these fantastic products, but because of the economic status of specific people, not everybody can benefit from this. And I think that this and intersectionality is very important. I think that we have focused a lot on discrimination on the basis of so-called race in this situation. But we have not focused as much as maybe we should on the discrimination on the basis of economic status. So in this respect, I thank Bevin for their comment. And also, if I may, greetings to all psychologists from me as well.
Dr. Prasam, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that was just said when it comes to the difference between that we know from the framers that did I just disappear? No, I didn't disappear,
No.
did I? Okay, no,
Yeah.
good. I'm still in. We know that the framers, the drafters, when they discussed the Universal Declaration and the International Covenant, that they made a difference between the production, the provision of knowledge and its products, whatever is made. And so for many of it's interesting to recall, I think, that for many of the drafters, scientific freedom should be almost absolute, not quite, of course. There are limitations to all human rights, and rightly so, but very free with regard to the provision of knowledge. But there should be, but when it comes to how that knowledge is done, the technology side of the product side of it, then that's a totally different matter. So I think that that's an important thing, and we need to maybe talk about those as two different things.
I want to take a moment to bring in a question in the chat from Bill Leonard, which asks, is there a limit to a code of ethics when technological implementation is low cost and distributed, making it available to the general public?
Can we hear a bit more about that? I mean, what is the what's the gist of it? What's the context for it before we answer? Perhaps, is that possible?
Yeah, Bill, if you're able to say a bit more in the chat, I am wondering, and please correct me if this is a wrong interpretation. I'm wondering if this might apply to something for code of ethics for technology when it's already very widely available, in the sense that what we're dealing with perhaps with AI, for example, when it's something like ChatGPT is already widely out there, and then we're trying to impose ethics or standards when the horse is already out of the barn, to use a really common expression. I'm wondering if that's the direction of the question, Bill. If it not, please feel to correct in the chat, and we can switch to that. But does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, actually, Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go
please,
ahead.
Professor, go ahead. No, please, Professor.
All right. So when I read this comment, I mean, this question, actually, I thought about citizen science. I mean, now we walk around with our phones. You can measure basically the noise you're exposed to in workplace and environment, and you can tell your employer, look, I'm exposed to excessive noise here, or some of the work we did down in Florida, the people, we measure the air quality in a community, depending where they live. And I think the scientists have a role to make sure this, they help the public how to interpret those, the data they come up with. Using this low cost, basically, technology. We still have a role to play here. We can't just let them interpret them the way they want, because we're knowledgeable about some of the findings they will come up with in their iPhone or smartphones. So I believe there's I don't see any limitation to the code of ethics, because this is the consumers basically using these tools they have. What the scientists need to do is just make sure they really explain or try to find a ways of making sure they don't, this being taken by those who use alternative truth. These conspiracy theories about whatever problem we come up with, and being able to provide really evidence-based type of information. So.
Thank you. And Bill has elaborated in the chat about research development in terms of chemical production and distributed manufacturing, implementations of 3D printing with the goal of reducing cost and expanding access across income levels and geographies. Dr. Zantaki, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Professor Cassana. The codes of conduct are not prohibitive, and in human rights, every day we try to create to solve to do balancing of rights. So if something is helps the all the income access across income levels and geographies, we have to take it into account vis-a-vis the challenges that the output of the science can have with respect to other human rights. And then we balance the two and we try to accommodate both. I don't think, like exactly like Professor Cassana said, I don't think that it is a matter of ethic of conduct. I think that it's a matter of balancing. But at the same time, I don't think that having the product out or not having the product out, making a very popular product or not having a very popular product is relevant here. Whether it's out or not, whether it is something that everybody uses or not, we still have to look at it, and we still have to focus on the human rights that it protects, but also the human rights that it may hinder and fight a balance.
And I think it also, if I may, addresses the issue that the law is always hopelessly behind. I mean, progress in science and technology is so fast that the law will always be behind. So, so sometimes, some of the issues that we're dealing with in the legal community are kind of like 10 years behind the scientific community. So that's a problem. That's a problem. But those kinds of ethical codes are about scientific behavior, also with regard to what might be the human cost of the product we're doing here. Would there be a human cost in us? Alexander was saying we need to balance that. In terms of human rights, again, which is our approach today, rights will always clash. So how do we find the right balance between them? And can the right to science be a help in terms of, for example, raising different stakeholder interests and getting those out there so that we can negotiate and talk about them? That's what I think is a big added value to human rights language as a whole.
If I may continue, what Helle was saying is absolutely right. Like the law generally, when it comes to science and technology lags behind, but I think that we have to, go back to principles all the time. And I think that the principles, some states want us to forget that the principles already exist and exist for a long time. The principles of non-discrimination, the principles of substantive equality, the principles of justice, the principles of participation. So I think that, when the law is not there, and we have found on several occasions recently that the law was taken aback by the, enormity of the situation, but when the laws are not there, then we really have to go back to basic principles that and interpret them.
Well, we're getting close to the end of the session, and I want to thank all our panelists and for the excellent questions that some folks have asked. I'm afraid we haven't been able to get to everyone, but I did want to take a couple minutes for the panelists if there's any closing remarks you would like to leave our audience with.
Certainly, who wants to start?
Shall we go according to the way we spoke?
Okay, so basically my hope is just really to have, yes, since you all studied all of this, I think we need to really keep pushing this agenda so we can make sure the right science is really common knowledge, because as I said, many communities where I do work in Africa, they pretty much don't even know what we're talking about. So many other issues they're dealing with. But if you give them guidance, if someone actually asked a question about what's going on in Rwanda, and I said, well, in Rwanda and much of Africa, local scientists are making baby steps in the area of research involving students, and it's working. So what they need the help, not the handouts, but to just making sure that they use those community health workers I was talking about, because most of the people in the rural areas and they don't have really the health literacy that you need when you're a subject of research, but you don't even know what you're supposed to do, and most of the time the findings will be published in a journal you can't even read, and that's really an issue also. So I'm hoping we'll continue this conversation, and with the help of AAAS, and I think this is really one way to promote the right science. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Porstang.
Yeah, well, from an American perspective, it may interest people to hear that one of the first persons who actually talked about the right to science was Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in the 30s. And for him, science was and technology had a lot to do with not widening the gap between rich and poor, to do something connected to economic rights also, so that people would not, in the American context, be attracted to fascism, to Nazism, and to all kinds of other things. So it's important, I think, that we remember that background, and that we also see science and technology together with the need for not widening that gap between rich and poor further. It's a really, really important thing, in my opinion, an agenda that science and technology can help further, doing something about that for this, so that we counter populism, we do something good worldwide.
And Dr. Santaki.
Thank you. I think that in my work, what I want to emphasize in general when it comes to cultural rights, and now the right science, is inclusivity. So inclusivity in the concept. So I want to reapply why, when we talk about indigenous sciences, we refer to traditional knowledge, whereas when we talk about the global north, we refer to science. So I think that, this is what I want to address. Inclusivity in its applications. Why have we focused so much on access? In a way, passive access rather than active participation, and what are the limits to that? And finally, to the application of the right, and why do we still have huge areas of discriminatory practices and substantive total inequality when it comes to this area, and we seem to not to address it and not to push for substantive equality in this aspect. And this is what I want to do in my report. So I urge you all, because you all have been working on this issue for a long, long time, all of you kind of audience and participants, to engage with my mandate and to continue to discuss with us. And in this way, the report is definitely going to benefit from your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we look forward to the report coming out next year. I want to take a minute to thank our participants and our speakers, our attendees again for your presentations, for asking some wonderful questions. We're going to now move to our sort of post-session discussion, some networking, although we're not that formal here. And Joel has just put the link in the chat, so if you're able to, please join us to have some social time with the other attendees of the conference. Thank you so much again. Really appreciate you taking the time today, and we hope you will join us not only at the session then, but also tomorrow at noon for our next session, which will focus on human rights and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So hope to see you very shortly, and if not, then tomorrow. So thank you so much again, and we look forward to these conversations over the coming week, and into next week as well. Take care.